Good evening, this is Brother Bro here. I have returned from the Cannes Film Festival, but we're still talking about the Cannes Film Festival. I'm gonna breeze through all the films that I didn't review individually and just tell you what I thought about them. Let's start off with one of the films I really liked called Universal Language, directed by Matthew Rankin. This is the first film of this director that I have seen, and it's a film that for most people I imagine will be a little bit outside of their comfort zone, but in the end it was surprisingly warm and heartfelt, and it had a message that it really wasn't trying to obscure from the audience. This film is about the Canadian town of Winnipeg, and really this town is the main character of the film. It is presented as exceptionally bland, which is the source of a lot of comedy here. And the production design is fascinating with the locations they chose to film at in order to characterize this city as being so bland. And the director puts himself in his own film as a character who is trying to find his mother. So it's kind of about how it's a place where if you have the opportunity, like, you'll probably leave. But then, there's this reckoning with it. Like, okay, well, this is my home, and like, what did I leave behind? And there's a large Persian community, and it dives into the Persian culture and their hospitality. There was a lot of that went over my head with the socio-political commentary on this place. Maybe if I watched it a second time, I would get more out of it. And also reading some reviews helped me contextualize the economic situation that Winnipeg is in, and it enhanced some of my understanding about these ideas. But whether or not you'll intellectually understand everything the movie's trying to say, overall you're gonna understand what it's saying, and it is a very moving film. It's also a hilarious film. Like, the opening scene in particular, one of the funniest scenes I'll see all year. I really love this movie. I would give it a strong 8 out of 10, and I would see it again. I also watched Holy Cow, which was one of the most buzzed about films in the Un Certain Regard section, and this one was a real crowd pleaser. It's funny, it's charming, it's a coming of age film. It's about a kid who suddenly finds himself responsible for his 7-year-old sister and has to make a way of living for them, so he discovers the art of creating cheese. There's also a love interest here, and that aspect is very sweet, and it also touches on that awkwardness of a first love or a first crush. While I did find the film entertaining and very funny, I felt like it was mostly conventional, and I was a bit out of sync with the audience overall in this. But I would give this between a 6 and a 7 out of 10. An in-competition film I saw was Limonov, the Ballad. This film was directed by Kirill Senebrennikov, and it stars Ben Whishaw playing the revolutionary militant thug and underground Russian writer Eduard Limonov. And Ben Wishaw's capture of his voice and his mannerisms and his tone, he embodies the stereotype of that witty Russian with the cigarette in his mouth, coming up with quippy, self-deprecating, existential jokes. But for me, the most interesting part of this film was the voiceover poetry that was from Limonov himself. But the film itself I found a bit boring. Limonov's life had a very strange structure to it. I think this makes the film interesting, that the arrow of his life kind of points in a different direction than you'd expect, and then he lands in a place where you can see how he's a very controversial figure, not necessarily someone you like. But for most of it, I didn't really care about him because his main characterization is that of a disaffected young person who just cares about tearing down every system. And I don't think that's super interesting for a character. It was kind of okay, of course, if you are this person, you're going to oppose this and you're gonna dislike this. And the character's views do change over time, and his behaviors do change in very interesting ways. He comes to adapt to society more than you would expect him to, and that's kind of what the crux of the film is about. There's a lot of interesting pieces in here, but overall I think the reason I didn't enjoy it more is because it feels a bit structureless, and it kind of falls into a biopic trap where they want to just tell you everything about him without distilling it. What I like about the film is you don't feel like it's endorsing this person, and you also don't feel like it has any disdain for him. If anything, it seems to honor and idolize him a bit, to a point where people may take issue with that, since his political views in the end, you really find out they are quite dangerous. There's some flirting with Nazis, let's just put it that way. It is directed with a lot of energy, and I think some people will like it. I give it a 5 out of 10. One of the films I'm most excited to talk about here is The Balconettes from Noémie Merlant. And this is a horror comedy buddy friendship movie that morphs and turns in very unexpected ways. You kind of think you're settling into one thing, but it completely turns around and becomes something else, and by the end I really didn't know what genre this film was trying to be, and I didn't care too much. More than anything, I think this is a comedy about female friendship, and I think it really succeeds on that level. The film is very fun, it has some great laugh out loud moments, and Noémie Merlant's direction and her camera work is really excellent here. It really feels like she's taking a big swing and trying something different. I feel like she's making the movie that she wanted to make, that she wanted to see exist out there in the world, and I know that some people are just gonna love it. Despite being a comedy, it's also not afraid to try and reach into your heart and has some very touching moments. The story has so many different plot threads and moves so freely between them that I know it's gonna lose some people, and I did feel it dip a bit in the second half because of that, but mostly I just trusted the storytelling, and I thought this was different in a delightful way. And I would give this a 7.5. I also saw Armand, which stars Renata Reinsva, and is directed by Halfdan Ullmann Tondel, who is the grandson of Liv Ullmann and Igmar Bergman. So I know what we all really want to know, is Reinsva good in this? She is excellent in this film, and she has a whole ensemble of amazing convincing performances. There's a play-like quality to the structure and the writing of the film, given that we're kind of trapped in one environment. It takes place entirely in a school, and we're slowly peeling back layers about characters and their relationship to one another. The film is very engaging in that sense. It's kind of a mystery because we don't really know the truth, and we're trying to read very carefully into the characters and their intentions. The cinematographer does a lot to elevate the material and make it feel cinematic, but there are a couple choices that I didn't love. There are some scenes that feel like performance art or experimental theater that just kind of lost me. I think they're going to polarize people in terms of whether they think that's like a good decision or not. My interest in the story waned a little bit by the end. Things were wrapped up a bit tidily for my taste, and I thought what the film had going for it was the ambiguity of these situations. So even though I think this is a very promising filmmaker and the performances are excellent, I would land somewhere around a 6 out of 10. I also saw My Sunshine, directed by Hiroshi Okuyama. This is a Japanese film about a young boy who wants to learn to figure skate and not be on the hockey team anymore, and a nice man offers to train him. The boy also develops a crush on one of the young female figure skaters, and the film overall is very tender and sweet. Perhaps what makes this film stand out the most is the cinematography. Whatever film stock that was used beautifully captured light and color. The film has a very distinct color palette with cyan and bright pink, and the figure skating scenes take on an almost surreal, hazy quality, the way that the light is streaming in through the windows. And this contributed to a filmic, nostalgic look that kind of wraps you up like a warm blanket. The plot is really simple here, but it kind of sweeps you off its feet with how tender, moving, and pure the relationships between the characters are. I also think it's a very positive example of gentle male mentorship in a world where male mentorship can wrongly be perceived as malevolent, and it does touch upon this as well. I ended up being very moved by this film, and I would give it an 8 out of 10. I also saw Good One, directed by India Donaldson. This film premiered at Sundance, but I didn't have the chance to catch it. And this is my favorite film of all the films I'm going to talk about. The film is very simple. It's about a weekend hiking trip between a 17-year-old girl, her dad, and her dad's friend. And the film begins being very unassuming. Like, it almost looks like it doesn't have any pretensions, except to take you along for a quite ordinary camping trip. You get to know the characters a little bit, but not in any ways that feel pretentious. It almost feels like there's not really a plot at all. Except the film is funny enough that I really didn't find a desire for it to like kick up to another level. Like, I could have just kind of hung out and watched the movie that was presented in the first half for the entirety of the runtime, and that would have been just fine with me. The screenplay has an excellent ear for the flow of ordinary conversation, which is what impressed me the most throughout the film. It's not often that a film is so very much about the modest moments that we share with others, and then just the little quips of humor, the exchanges that we tend to have that we don't think anything of. But the film actually does stealthily become something more, and I'm not going to go into more detail than that, but I will say this film will stick with me for a very long time. It left a great impression on me, and I just want people to experience it for themselves. I absolutely loved it. It was very moving. It felt extremely truthful and organic. Haven't seen a film quite like this one. I'm extremely excited for what the director does next, and I'm going to give this a 9 out of 10. I also saw Miguel Gomez's Grand Tour. You may know this director from 2012's Taboo, which was one of the most acclaimed films of the year that I've not gotten the chance to see. This film was fascinating. I got the sense that it was very much for students of film. I can fully admit that I did not pick up on everything the filmmaker wanted me to with this. It really abides by its own set of rules and doesn't want you to watch it like a typical movie. And I was able to settle into its vibe when I realized, like, this is mostly a film that's just trying to be a travelogue. Often we're just lingering on shots that give us snapshots into a culture or a ritual of one of its many locations in East Asia. And even if you don't understand what the filmmaker is going for at a deeper level, you can enjoy the film just with the gorgeous and hypnotic cinematography. It has a surreal and dreamlike quality that I was very into. But it was very bizarre to watch the story take shape and then feel like you're actually kind of getting what the story's doing, and then for the story to end the way that it does made me wonder, like, oh, I really guess I just didn't understand this movie fully, so I can't really go too high on it on a personal level, but for now it's a 6 out of 10. I saw Karim Ayanuz's film Motel Destino, and I thought this one was kind of a dud. This film starts out strong with deeply saturated colors, and I love how it characterized the titular motel with the ever-present sounds of sex and the blistering heat. It does function well as an erotic thriller, and the three main characters have a very strange and interesting dynamic. But by the end, like, I was not really happy with the turn that this film went on. It sort of promises to be a thriller, and then when it goes in that direction, it just isn't that interesting. And I was kind of shocked to see that the ending was resolved with such a coincidence. Just struck me as kind of lazy writing. And it also seemed like at a point the characters were just not going to make decisions that made a ton of sense. So this one felt pretty flat for me. I felt like, oh, there's not that much ambition here after all. So I give this one a disappointing 4 out of 10. I also saw Souleymane's Story from Boris Lojkin. This is a social realism film about an African migrant seeking asylum who works the streets of Paris to deliver meals on his bike. And I love that we get a window into the lives of these delivery workers who work by bike. And the film serves a very valuable purpose to connect us with people going through that experience. With these social realism films like those of the Dardenne brothers or Ken Loach, they're very easy to engage with, and I find that they're quite entertaining. It's very easy to understand that everything is kind of life or death to these characters, like not making the next paycheck, not being able to meet the deadline for your asylum application, or getting a customer review that might make DoorDash ban your account. These type of films generate empathy for the protagonist just by watching them go through everyday situations. I think the ending is a real standout here, with an excellent monologue from Abu Sangare, whose performance throughout is just excellent, but that ending scene is really going to stick with me. This film was really solid. I would recommend it to anybody. I'd give it an 8 out of 10. I saw David Cronenberg's The Shrouds. And my overall impression of this one was that it was quite laborious. The film is extremely talky, like many of David Cronenberg's recent films, and though I haven't seen every one of his recent works, I have heard that it is the most talky, and it is just hard to imagine the film having more dialogue packed into its runtime. There are definitely some interesting pieces here, and I can see why some people are connecting with it. It's really about the way that this character is coping with grief, and we know Cronenberg wrote it with the death of his wife in mind, so he clearly was putting a lot of thought into this film. I don't think it's fair, even if you were bored by it and it's kind of a boring movie, to just outright dismiss it and doesn't say it has any ideas. Like, I think the people who want to find the ideas are going to find them, but honestly, I did try to look for them. I was quite alert throughout the film. I thought I was following it pretty well, but I think it just wants us to do too much work. Most people at the end are just going to feel confounded. Like, I really just threw up my hands at the end and I was kind of scratching my head like, oh, I don't really know what I'm supposed to make about that. I also feel kind of safe not recommending this one because most people I talked to at Cannes did not like it. Personally, I have to go with a 4 out of 10 here. And lastly, I saw Parthenope, directed by Paolo Sorrentino. If you've seen a Paolo Sorrentino film, you're going to recognize this one. It is both the best and the worst of this director. And you can see if you look up this film on Letterboxd, it's getting a very wide range of responses, and I can definitely see why. I was a little bit checked out with this film. I think it feels like it starts to repeat itself, and you kind of know what it's trying to say after a short period. It's not quite as stylistically engaging as The Great Beauty. It doesn't utilize music quite as effectively, although it is very effective in certain scenes. A big issue for this movie is that the main character is just very idealized. Like, she's this beautiful woman who's just so smart, and she has this eagerness to learn about the world, this curiosity, and the older men around her try to tell her that she should try to maintain this beauty and her doe-eyedness because the world will take that away from you with age. But I really found something touching about the very end of this film, like the last 10 minutes. It gave me some of the feelings I had during the heights of The Great Beauty. I think if you step back and just look at the story it's trying to tell about the character overall, it's very poignant. Something about it rings true about life. For example, one character utters that sex is the death of desire. And a lot of these lines are played sort of humorously because it's such an exaggerated way to say something, but at the same time, it rings true. Some people are going to feel like this film doesn't work at all because the character is just too idealized. She's too much like a product of, the man who is writing this film. She is a manifestation of the male gaze, and characters around her are very keen to tell her about all the pretty privilege she has. I also couldn't quite get over that. She didn't really feel like a real person. But at the same time, I kind of accept a film that's just trying to be poetic and isn't necessarily concerned with its characters feeling real. So I would give Parthenope a 6 out of 10, but the ending alone I would give like 8 out of 10 too. I am really pissed that I did not stay for the last few days of the festival. I'm pissed that I didn't see All We Can See Is Light and The Seed of the Sacred Fig. Like, god damn it. But next year if I go, I will definitely make sure to be there for the last few days. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. What movies should I have seen that I did not?